Um, as Lynn has already referred, it's been a tender week. There's so much going on in our world. And we're going through a series called A New Exodus. And we're calling it that because Matthew, it's based on the book of Matthew, who's kind of the lectionary gospel this year that we're working through, really designed his book like a new Exodus with 5 key discourses of Jesus, like the 5 books in the Old Testament, the Torah. And he portrays Jesus as a new Moses, leading us out of slavery into a new Exodus. So today, I want to begin with what seems to be a paradox in this text. It's a seeming contradiction. You ever find the Bible contradicts each other, different parts? If you think it does, you're right. It does. It's a complicated book. It's a human book with all kinds of different human perspectives on encounters with God, breathed and inspired by the Holy Spirit, so that we could learn and grow. And this contradiction I want to bring to your attention today is this one. Let your light shine, but a few verses later says, Jesus says, don't tell anybody. You ever notice that? He says, let your light shine, this verse here, before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And then in a few verses later, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. Living proof. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So what's going on here? Well, context is everything, and paradox and contradiction is important because I think it brings out what it means to let our light shine. And if we didn't have this paradox, I think we would be a bit poor for understanding that there's something going on here with our story. So I want to talk about our story. VEV, Vancouver Eastside Vineyard. But in order to accurately talk about our story, this is all going back to letting our light shine. So hang in there. It's one of Gordy's segues, right? So it's rabbit trails, maybe. We're going to start with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So our story began with God calling this man Abraham and telling him, while he was still childless and very old, that out of him would come this great nation, and that he and his family would be a blessing to all the families of the earth. And just in the nick of time, they had a baby. He was 100, his wife was 90. It's not having the baby part that scares me when you're 90. It's raising that baby when you're 90. And so they had a child. His name was Isaac. And Isaac was the father of Jacob, whose name became Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. Wrestles. They don't have it all figured out. They don't have a bunch of black and white rules and formulas. They wrestle with God, right? And Jacob has 12 sons. And his 11th son, Joseph, ends up in Egypt, first as a slave, sold by his own brothers. Talk about the family of God. And then he ends up being a prisoner because he's falsely accused of sexual assault. But then he ends up becoming the prime minister of Egypt. What a trajectory. And then during a worldwide famine, his family, who was back in Canaan, finds refuge in Egypt. About 70 of them by that time. So grandchildren, grandparents, parents, and grandchildren. 3 generations traveled together. About 70 of them to Egypt. And Joseph is now ruling beside Pharaoh and provides refuge for these people. And Egypt, you have to understand, is the empire of that day. It is a military industrial complex that rules the world, characterized by militarism, idolatry of temple. They had thousands of gods and goddesses. And they had an economy that was built largely on slave labor, oppression. A few were prospering at the expense of many. Does that sound familiar? And so, over the course of time, there arose another Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. And the Israelites, now a vast multitude in Egypt, end up becoming slaves of the empire. And they're oppressed by Egypt. And they seem, interestingly, they go for generations and they don't complain about it. It's kind of like, I guess this is the way it is, right? But all of a sudden, another Pharaoh comes on, and he must have been more oppressive, because it says they started to cry out. And it's interesting that for the first time in the text, it says that God heard and came down to check it out. Isn't that interesting? There was something about them crying out that brought God into action. And so God responds, and God raises up a deliverer. His name is Moses, who from the beginning of his story, he beats up bullies. He had some anger issues, and he ends up murdering an Egyptian, and he ends up in the desert for 40 years, but he beats up some more bullies who are picking on the women who are coming to get water from the well. I think, God had to do some work with him, but he was heading in the right direction, right? And so he's 40 years in the desert, and he encounters God in this burning bush, and God sends him to Pharaoh and tells him to say to Pharaoh, "Let my people go that they may worship me." And Pharaoh says, "No." So there's some heavenly arm twisting. There's 10 plagues, and after the 10th plague, they're released, and they have their exodus. Freedom from Egypt. And they, of course, go through the Red Sea, through the desert, and they come to where? Mount Sinai. Remember the Sermon on the Mount? There's a parallel. There's another mount here. Okay? So they came to Mount Sinai, and when they get there, God says to them, "You're free, but you need to understand that, as my prophet Bob Dylan says, you have to serve somebody. You got to serve somebody." Right? So he says to them on Mount Sinai, "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you are to speak to the Israelites." The way that Isaiah the prophet would say it later was, "I will make you a light for the nations." Does that ring a bell? "Let your light shine, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." So this was Israel's call. And God said, you're going to be a kingdom of priests, and you're not to have a king. No kings. That's very biblical. No kings. "I will be your king," with a capital K. God, I'm not talking about me, I'm speaking on behalf of God. Just keeping that clear. "And I will be your king, and the whole nation, you as a whole nation, will be a kingdom of priests to disciple the nations, a light to the nations. You will be holy, distinct, other, different, set apart from the other nations of the world." How? Well, he gave them the 10 Commandments. He says, this is your constitution. This is how you're going to be different. The 10 Commandments and case law. And one of the first commands was, to a generation of slaves, it was good news. Take a day off. The invention of the weekend, and I'm not talking about the musician. I'm talking about the weekend. It was invented by God in the Exodus, in the Ten Commandments. Keep the Sabbath day. You're not just a producing machine. You are a person. Sabbath is when you stop and you remember who you are and whose you are. Right? So you give up that productivity and you learn how to be a child of God, God's beloved. Have no other gods. Because the gods were just simply self-worship, right? There are ways of, and that's what addictions are. Whether it's porn or drugs or work or money, it's all self-worship. And God says, no, I'm to be your God. Take a day off. And then out of that flows justice. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Honor your parents. Don't kill. Don't commit adultery. Don't lie. It's a society in fidelity to God and justice towards one another. But they had a we want to be like them problem. As Israel's history progressed, they said, we want to be like those other nations. They have a king. We want a king. God says, I'll give you a king, but you're not going to like it. And the first king was a real turkey. He had a false start. And he was rejected early, so then God brought King David, kind of an archetype. David was an archetype of a righteous king, as long as you don't look too closely. No investigative journalism on David's life. Bit of a character too, right? And then you have Solomon at the height of Israel's glory. And get this, prosperity, prestige, took people's breath away. Remember the Queen of Sheba when she visited? They had ivory palaces, gilded thrones, and they multiplied a standing military empire. They multiplied horses, which had been strictly forbidden by God in the law. God said, don't do that. Don't multiply horses, and don't multiply wives. And so what did Solomon do? He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's some domestic challenges there. Right? So it starts to go south here a little bit. And here's the kicker. Solomon, when you have all of these projects and this money and this military, you need money. You need workers. And he began to conscript his own people. 30,000 Israelis were conscripted as slaves to build his empire. And what happened? Israel, who had been called to worship Yahweh in justice, had become Egypt. Egypt followed Israel into the promised land. That is, they became an empire themselves of idolatry and injustice. So who comes along? The prophets. The prophets began to challenge Israel, and they said, hey, you forgot where you come from. You forgot the law. You forgot the God's encounter. God's called to be a light to the nations. Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos. Many at the cost of their own lives confronted the empire. Just like we have prophets today that are crying out, right? Return to God. Remember God's covenant with you. The law. Give up those idols. Live lives of justice. What were the big sins that prophets criticized Israel for? Idolatry and injustice. Those are the two big ones. And my favorite is Isaiah. Isaiah 58 is kind of a summary. This is the fast. This is Isaiah preaching to Israel in their empire building. I've called you to loose the bonds of injustice. Get rid of that slave labor. Declare a year of Jubilee. Did you know that every 7 years they were supposed to cancel every debt? Every debt was canceled. Wouldn't that be incredible? Every 7 years. Every 50 years, if people lost land, they had to have their family land restored to them. And that economy was supposed to be that way. They never followed it. But Isaiah says, loose the bonds of injustice. Undo the heavy burdens. Let the oppressed go free. Break every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry. Bring the homeless poor into your house. When you see the naked, to cover them. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn. How do you let your light shine? Do you have a Christian concert and say, look at us? Or do you just do justice? God says if you do that, you don't need to show off. The light's going to come. The light's going to come. And then this one, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness. And your gloom will be like the noonday. You know what the beautiful thing about light is? There's light in this room, but are we looking at the light? No, the light is illuminating. The light helps us see. The light shows us what's going on. The light doesn't draw attention to itself, right? It's how we see. It's not what we see, it's how we see. It's how we see. I love David in Psalms. He says, Lord, in your light, we see light, right? And so, enter Jesus. Speaking of prophets, he meets on the Mount of Transfiguration. Today is Transfiguration Sunday. Who does he meet? Who shows up? Moses, the law. Who else? Elijah, who represented the prophets. And the second Moses, the last Moses, has a discussion with them. And Jesus shows up, and in this sermon, we'll get back to Transfiguration in a minute, but in this sermon, Jesus shows up as the last prophet to Israel, and he says, the salt's not salty anymore. It's only good for the manure pile. And you know what? There was a manure pile outside of Jerusalem called Gehenna. And he said, if you don't repent of your hell-bent way towards violence and revolution and bloodshed, the whole city's going to become a manure pile. The whole city's going to become a garbage dump. The whole city's going to become a Gehenna. And that's exactly what happened in 70 A.D. All those warnings that Jesus gave in the Gospels and John the Baptist, it was all about that day. They were warning them, if you keep going this path of just following the way of empire, you're going to just end up like the empires. That's what's going to happen. And so with tears in his eyes, he wept over Jerusalem and said, oh, if you'd have known the day of your peace, if you'd just known. He came, I believe this with all my heart. Richard Rohr says it this way. If we don't understand Jesus first as a prophet, then we don't understand Jesus. If we don't understand that Jesus came first as a prophet, yes, he is Messiah. Yes, he is God incarnate. He is those things. But he came as a prophet, as the last great prophet to Israel. And he came to them and he said this, the salt's gone saltless, the light's being hidden, but guess what? The project's not abolished. The project now is being fulfilled. And how is that so? He says to them, a new exodus, a new freedom from empire is being instituted with a new constitution. And that constitution is like Moses gave the law on Mount Sinai, Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. Where there is, and he said there's a new Israel where it's not just ethnic Israel, but it's now where there's neither Jew nor Greek or Gentile. There's neither male nor female. There's neither slave nor free, but they are one in Christ Jesus. And they're all different, but they still love one another. He said, that's the light. You are the light of the world. If you live like this, and the early church for the first 3 or 4 centuries, they conquered the Roman Empire because the keynote thing that was said about them is, behold how they love one another. They didn't agree about anything. You're not going to agree about anything. Except what Jesus said, love one another. And so, he gave them a curriculum. And I'll just quickly give you the syllabus for the curriculum. He said, first of all, this curriculum is deal with your anger. And there's 2 extremes. One is where you suppress it and deny it, and then it comes out sideways, right? The other is where you just let it be toxic and destroy people. He said there's another way: be angry and sin not. Deal with your lust. And again, there's two extremes. One is the purity culture, which has really been effective, hasn't it? With all the sexual abuse scandals in evangelicalism and in the Catholic Church. That hasn't worked. And of course, the other is promiscuity, where you just, if it feels good, you do it. And it's just destroyed lives. Jesus has a better way. Then, keep your promises. Resist retaliation. Got to tell the Canadian hockey team that. Love your enemies. Is this easy? Don't be a hypocrite. Ooh, that's tough. Don't be a play actor. Pray this way: Our Father who is in heaven, forgive freely. Where's Frances? She's our forgiveness champion, residential school survivor. How about this one? Keep your eye full of light. Don't serve mammon, which is money. Don't worry about money. Don't judge. Ask, seek, knock, you will receive, find, the door will be opened. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Not like the preschooler said, do unto others before they do unto you. That's not.
That's not all of his.
Preteen. Enter by the narrow gate and take the hard road. Is this easy? It's hard. It's hard. I used to preach to young people when I was in my 20s, and I'd have these youth rallies, and I'd say, if you follow Jesus, it's going to be hard. You're going to suffer, and you're going to die, and it's just hard. And then I'd go, guess what? Life's hard anyway. So do you want to do it with Jesus or without him? Right? So this is hard. This stuff we're talking about. We're going to work through this in the coming weeks and months. It's hard. Right? But he said enter it, because it's the way that leads to life. Beware of deceivers. Don't deceive yourself. Hear and do, and your house will stand. Hear and don't do, your house will be swept away. Your life. The people who live like this will fulfill the project of the law and the prophets, to be a just and worshiping society, to be salt and light. The gates of hell will not prevail against a church like this. It's not easy. The gate is narrow. The road is hard. It's hard not to be angry all the time now. Isn't it true? It's hard not to be angry. I just wake up and turn on the news and look at social media, and I'm just pissed all day. Right? So easy to be that way. So it's hard not to want to put others in their place, right? It's hard not to be winners and losers. It's hard not to mock and vilify your enemies like they're doing to you. It's hard to turn the other cheek, to not retaliate, to let it go. It's hard to do to them as you would have them do to you. It's not easy. It will be hard. It will be unpopular. I just loved it when Lynn was talking about that Indigenous elder that sang at the memorial on Friday night in Tumbler Ridge. And, Pierre Poilievre is there, and Carney's there, and the MDP leader is there, and then David Eby is there with the Green Party, and this Indigenous elder says, before I sing my song, I want you all to join your hands. And it was just a beautiful picture. I saw Poilievre and Carney holding hands as he prayed his prayer. But blessed are the peacemakers, because they'll be vilified. Right? Is when we give up this polarization, and we work for seeing the humanity in every person, as much as we disagree with them. So, the gate is narrow, the road is hard. It will be unpopular. It's narrow, but it leads to life. And if you do it, you will stand. And if you don't, you're going to get chewed up and spit out by the machine, by the empire. The empire is reaching for you and I every day. That's why we have to have our minds renewed. We have to just soak ourselves in the presence of God and scriptures and worship and love with one another, encouraging each other. Who will you serve? Who will you serve, church? There's a lot of people here today, and I want this recorded. I want this to get out to everybody because we're in a critical time. I grew up reading this guy named Josh McDowell. Anybody remember him? I think he's still around. He has this book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. He did a whole series of them. And as a kid, I loved it. He specialized in what's called Christian apologetics. And he wrote a series of books on this. And as a young person, I found them incredibly helpful. He had lots of good, logical reasons why the Christian faith is credible from an intellectual point of view. However, in this text, Jesus gives us the most important apologetic. Love is the greatest apologetic. It doesn't draw attention to itself. It just illuminates everything else. You are the light by which we see, David said. Very few have come to faith by losing an argument. Can I say that again? Very few have come to faith by losing an argument. But millions and millions have come to faith because they saw love in action, or they received love in action, right? Not by coercion, not by force. So the best apologetic for us is VEV. In our stories, a community of diversity that in spite of our diversity loves one another, worships Jesus, and takes care of the poor and the marginalized. So on Friday, I was doing my shop, and I did my sneaky Valentine's shopping. And I had the flowers, and I had the card. And so there was a cashier, and somebody was helping her pack my groceries, and we were just bantering around, and they said, boy, because it was Friday, right? Valentine's was yesterday. They said, man, you're just ahead of the game. You're so prepared. I guess they're just used to people coming in frantically on Valentine's Day, looking for something, right? I said, well, I've had 48 years of practice. And the guy there said, whoa, 48 years, that is a long time. And I said, that's what my wife says. But anyway, it was just a simple, sweet moment where I just felt the light. I felt the light shining, When Prime Minister Carney shared at that memorial, and Polivier was great too. When David Eby shared, and we heard the phrase over and over again, this is grace. This is grace in the midst of the pain and the suffering. This is grace. You know what I saw? I saw light. People didn't get up. The pastor didn't get up. There was a Pentecostal pastor got up. He didn't take advantage of that to be preachy. They just loved. They just loved. There is grace. And, a few years ago, there's a guy who'd been homeless on the street. Just a number of people in our church loved on him, took him in. Got back on his feet. Then he thought, I want to give back. Because when we first moved to Commercial Drive, we moved back in 1991. Did you know that this September will be the 30th year that I've been lead pastor here? Isn't that interesting? I just realized that. But we were actually part of the church for 5 years before that. And in 1991, we moved to a little apartment over on Commercial Drive. And I remember there was such an anti-Christian sentiment, anti-church sentiment. I just felt it everywhere. This was kind of the time when all the televangelist scandals were happening, and and there was just a lot of reaction to the church. Anyway, this guy said, I want to give back. So about 1994, they started the Chili Wagon. And for 20 years, every Tuesday on Commercial Drive, they just had a meal, not for the poor, not to the poor, but with the poor. It was like a Pentecost celebration. Let's just eat and enjoy together. And you know what I watched over those 20 years? Just something shifted in the whole environment. Just a favor. Grandview Baptist was also part of this. They had their own outreaches to the poor. And it just broke down those barriers. So by the time we moved out of the drive from the Salvation Army to here, there was this incredible favor. And I feel it here in this neighborhood. Did you know that those bells will ring and I've had people tell me they've heard the bells ring. They woke up in the morning and thought, I'd like to go to church. That's what happened. Well, I don't know if you heard the bells, Jade, but Jade just walked in one day. Said, I want to go to church. I've always wanted to go to church. Right? I think there's been a lot of light shining. There's been a lot of light. There's a receptivity. But people are not stupid. They know the difference between a false Pharisaical religion and Jesus. They know the difference. And I think that's what we're called to as a church. So, why don't we just stop for a moment and maybe give an opportunity for some response. Maybe just, if we could just go back into silence, just maybe take a couple of breaths. Just be aware of your breath, make yourself comfortable in your chair. Just feel the weight of your body on the bench or your feet on the floor. Just know that at a much deeper level, you're being held by compassion right now. You're loved. How are we distinct? How are we unique? How are we different? What is the light? Sit with those questions. And what is the invitation for us today? Jesus. We've had different seasons, and I think what it looks like in our time, there's unique factors, right? I think of that Amish community that publicly came out later and announced that they had forgiven the killer of all those kids that had been shot. That didn't come easy. That came through much anguish and pain. But I'll tell you what, it shook a generation. There's another way. What about us?